Welcome to Mysterious Clues, where we uncover hidden truths and unsolved mysteries from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. It was a curious sort of invitation that first brought Hercule Poirot to Dorsetshire, and an even curiouser household that awaited him there. The note had arrived neatly folded in an envelope of thick ivory paper, bearing a family crest. Poirot did not immediately recognize a silver lion rampart above a shattered crown. Beneath the elegant calligraphy was a brief message: Monsieur Poirot, your discretion and insight are required in a delicate family matter. There has been no crime yet, but I fear one is imminent. With sincere urgency, Lady Imogen Willoughby, Ashcroft Hall. Poirot had raised an eyebrow, carefully folded the note back into its envelope, and tapped it twice with his forefinger. No crime yet. Such a phrase was bait to the little grey cells. And besides, he was between cases, and found the English countryside agreeably dull in late spring. A potential crime wrapped in nobility and secrecy was just the thing to sharpen his mind. By the time he stepped out of the hired car in front of Ashcroft Hall, the clouds above had begun to gather like gossip, heavy and expectant. The estate was the sort Poirot had come to associate with a fading class, grand but fraying, ivy-strangled, proud in its decline. The windows of the manor blinked back at him with aristocratic indifference. The butler, a gaunt man named Treadwell with a voice like sandpaper and cheekbones sharp enough to slice bread, led him through a wide vestibule flanked by ancestral portraits. Poirot was shown to the drawing-room where Lady Imogen awaited him. She rose as he entered, a tall woman in her early 60s with the angular grace of an oil painting. Her ash-grey hair was swept back in a style that had once been fashionable, and her pale hands were adorned with rings she did not fidget with. Her composure was absolute. "Monsieur Poirot," she said in a low, clipped voice, "thank you for coming. I trust the journey was not too disagreeable." "On the contrary," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "The countryside, it is very, how do you say, cleansing to the soul. But I suspect, madame, that your letter suggests my soul shall not remain so tranquil for long." Lady Imogen gave a ghost of a smile. "Indeed, it is not peace I am offering you, but a puzzle." She gestured to a seat. "Before we begin, do you know much of my family, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot settled himself neatly in the chair, placing his hat on his knees. "Only that the Willoughbys are of Old English stock, and that Ashcroft Hall has belonged to your family for many generations." "Centuries," she corrected, with a faint note of pride. "But I'm afraid the lines of blood do not carry with them guarantees of character." She walked to the sideboard, poured herself a small measure of sherry, and turned back toward him. "My husband, Colonel Desmond Willoughby, died 3 years ago. Since then, I've remained at Ashcroft with my children, or more precisely, with my child and his entourage. Your son? Yes, Julian. He returned from the war a changed man, not in the way you might imagine, no visible wounds, no nightmares, but something in him hardened. He married quickly a girl from Sussex named Cassandra, and with her came her younger brother Felix, who seems to have taken up permanent residence here." Her lip curled ever so slightly. "And this entourage," said Poirot gently, "has become a problem. It has turned the house into a theatre of tension. Cassandra plays the gracious mistress of the manor, but she's as brittle as crystal. Felix, meanwhile, fancies himself a sort of poet-philosopher, drifting about with insolent charm and unfinished verses. Then there is Clara, my niece, my late sister's daughter. She's lived with me since she was a girl. Bright, kind, and increasingly unhappy." Poirot gave a small nod. "And you sense that something is amiss?" "Not merely sense it. Last week there was a quarrel, one of many, but this one ended with a terrible crash. One of the heirlooms, a Venetian mirror that belonged to my grandmother, was shattered in the East Wing hallway. No one has claimed responsibility, and yet I suspect it was no accident. That mirror, like many things in this house, meant more than it seemed." Poirot steepled his fingers. "You think it was symbolic, madame?" "I think it was a warning." She walked to a small cabinet and drew out a folded piece of parchment. "The next morning I found this under my bedroom door." Poirot took the note and opened it carefully. The handwriting was crude, almost childlike, All things must break eventually, even legacies. He looked up. And you fear this is only the beginning? Lady Imogen nodded. There is resentment here, Monsieur Poirot. Hidden, but sharp. Someone resents the weight of this house, its history, its entitlements, and I believe that someone may be planning to end it, perhaps through me. Poirot rose and smoothed his lapel. Then let us not allow them the satisfaction. I shall remain. Lady Imogen, and I shall observe. She seemed to exhale for the first time. Thank you. Tell me, Poirot added, are all the members of the household currently in residence? She turned to face the window. Yes. Cassandra, Felix, Julian and Clara are all here, as well as our housekeeper, Mrs. Bletchley, and Treadwell. Of course. Poirot nodded slowly. Then, madame, it is time to introduce myself to them. And outside, as if on cue, the first crack of thunder rolled across the Dorset hills. The next morning dawned pale and grey, with a dull mist that clung to the grounds like a secret left untold. Poirot, ever a creature of ritual, took breakfast. Alone in the morning room, toast, a soft-boiled egg and 2 cups of strong black coffee, precisely arranged to his satisfaction. The silence of Ashcroft Hall was not peaceable. It hummed with restraint, like a violin string drawn taut but not yet played. At precisely 9:30, Treadwell appeared, silent as a spectre, to inform Poirot that the family was gathered in the drawing-room at Lady Imogen's request. Poirot, wiping the final crumb from his fingers, nodded once and followed. The drawing-room was not a warm place. It bore the markings of old money and older pride. Walnut panelling, a vast fireplace of cold stone, and furniture so stiff it seemed more intended for display than comfort. As Poirot entered, all heads turned with varying degrees of curiosity and unease. Lady Imogen stood at the hearth, her spine as straight as the andirons behind her. Beside her was Clara, tall, soft-featured, with auburn hair pinned up in a hurried chignon. She gave Poirot a fleeting smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Julian Willoughby sat with his legs crossed and his fingers templed, a man of 35, with a hawkish profile and an unmistakable military stillness. He wore a crisp navy suit with no flair, and though his expression was civil, there was a latent impatience in his posture, as if every conversation were a preamble to something more important. Cassandra, seated on the settee, had the elegance of a woman conscious of her own appearance. She wore a fitted olive dress and a brooch shaped like a moth. Her smile was practiced, her eyes watchful. At her feet lounged her brother Felix, a lean man in his 20s with a lock of hair perpetually falling into his eyes and the languid manner of one who found effort vulgar. A cigarette danced between his fingers despite the early hour. Lady Poulme. Imogen gestured to Poirot. May I present Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the gentleman I mentioned yesterday. He is here at my invitation. Ah, the famous detective, Felix said with a smirk. Should we be alarmed? Has a body turned up in the shrubbery? Poirot inclined his head slightly. I am merely a visitor, monsieur, not yet a bloodhound. Though I find the shrubbery of English estates often quite telling. Julian's voice cut in. Mother, I must ask, what exactly have you told him? Only that I suspect something is brewing beneath this roof, Lady Imogen said, unflinching, and that I have reason to believe it may not end well. Cassandra's smile twitched. Really, Imogen, this is beginning to sound like a sensation novel. No, said Clara quietly. It sounds like the truth. All heads turned to her. She looked down, abashed, then folded her hands tightly in her lap. Poirot watched with great interest. Julian rose. If there is a specific concern, Poirot, I hope you'll bring it to me directly. I manage the estate now, and I won't have my family subjected to unnecessary scrutiny. But, monsieur, said Poirot mildly, the scrutiny is not mine. It already exists, no? The note left under Lady Imogen's door, the shattered mirror, the tensions that pulse so clearly through this room, these are not things I have created. I am merely the observer. That note could have been anyone, said Felix. Some. A melodramatic servant, perhaps. We've had several come and go this past year. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. And the mirror. Silence. Then Cassandra spoke, her voice smooth. An accident, surely. That hallway catches drafts terribly. Doors slam, things fall. Poirot glanced at Clara, who had gone quite still. He took a step forward. Then, allow me a courtesy. I should like to speak with each of you briefly, if you would be so kind. Not an interrogation, but merely conversation. Julian's jaw tensed. Is that really necessary? Yes, said Lady Imogen before Poirot could reply. It is. One by one the family filtered out. Cassandra first, offering a murmured excuse about a hair appointment in the village. Felix followed shortly after, pausing only to flick ash into a nearby potted plant. Julian lingered, clearly reluctant, but eventually took his leave with a muttered word to Treadwell. Only Clara remained, her hands still clasped. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle, would you permit me the first conversation with you? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course. They moved to the conservatory, a long glass room lined with orchids and sun-bleached rugs. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and citrus polish. Poirot waited until they were seated before speaking. You are unhappy here, mademoiselle? Looked surprised. Why do you say that? The eyes they betray. And unhappiness, it is not so easily masked in someone who is unpracticed at deception. Clara gave a weak smile. I suppose I've never been good at hiding how I feel. Poirot leaned forward. Then perhaps you can help me understand. What has disturbed the peace of this household? She hesitated. Things have changed since the Colonel died. Julian took control of everything, finances, decisions, the staff. Cassandra encourages him, but he has become rigid, controlling, even cruel. To you? To all of us. But especially to his mother. He's spoken more than once about selling Ashcroft. Says the estate is a relic. Cassandra would prefer a place in London. Felix is just along for the ride. Poirot's brow furrowed. And you, mademoiselle? Why do you remain? She looked away. Because this was once home. Because Lady Imogen is the only family who ever showed me kindness. I can't leave. Her here to be eaten alive. Poirot studied her face. And the mirror? Clara's jaw tightened. I didn't break it, if that's what you're asking. No, mademoiselle, I am asking if you know who did. There was a long silence. Then, carefully, she said, No, but I heard voices, late that night. Raised voices. Cassandra and Julian. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard glass break and someone swearing. Poirot nodded slowly. And the note? Another pause. I saw Felix in the west hallway that morning. He looked shaken, but when I asked, he just made a joke. He always does that when he's frightened. Poirot smiled faintly. Merci, mademoiselle, that is all for now. As Clara rose and left, Poirot remained seated, listening to the distant chime of the hall clock striking 10. Outside, the mist was beginning to lift, and the outline of Ashcroft's tall hedges emerged like walls in a maze. There was something here. Not just resentment, but something older. Grudges carried beneath the surface like bones beneath the soil. The family played at civility, but already Poirot sensed the cracks, and as he rose to begin the next interview, he wondered not whether there would be a crime, but how soon it would come. Poirot did not waste time. After Clara's departure, he returned briefly to the morning room, where Treadwell stood discreetly with hands folded behind his back. The butler had that peculiar English quality of seeming ever-present, yet never intrusive, a walking ghost of formality. Treadwell, Poirot said softly, might I impose on you to request Mr. Felix join me here for a short conversation? Of course, sir, came the gravelly reply. He is likely in the library, sir. Shall I fetch him now? If you would be so. Kind? Treadwell departed with a slow nod. Poirot wandered to the window. The mist outside was thinning in patches, but the garden beyond remained shrouded, its hedges like stoic sentinels in mourning. Something about the estate stirred a quiet, a melancholy, an old house watching itself dissolve. Poirot often found that settings echoed their occupants. A few minutes later, the door opened and Felix drifted in, unhurried, trailing the vague scent of bergamot and tobacco. He flopped into a nearby armchair with the grace of a man who had never earned a thing in his life. Treadwell said you wished to interrogate me, he said, flashing a lazy grin. Should I brace myself? Poirot smiled. Only if you are easily bruised, monsieur. I am not the police. I am merely a guest with an appetite for the truth. Terribly French of you, Felix murmured, flicking invisible lint from his lapel. Well then, truth away. Poirot folded his hands. Tell me, Monsieur Felix, your relationship with the Willoughbys, it is familial only through your sister, yes? Correct. Cassandra married Julian just after the war. I was 20 at the time, fresh out of nothing in particular. Cass invited me to Ashcroft for the summer, and I simply never left. Indeed? And no one objected? Oh, they did, Felix said with amusement. Julian muttered, Imogen glared. But Cassandra insisted. She said I brought life into the house. And now? Now, Felix said, his eyes narrowing slightly, I suspect they would pay handsomely to see me off the premises. Julian, especially. We don't exactly align on matters of ambition. Poirot tilted his head. And your ambition, monsieur? Not to inherit Ashcroft, if that's what you're wondering. Felix smirked. I prefer my freedom. Besides, the estate is a decaying relic. Julian sees that too. The only difference is he wants to profit from its remains. I at least let it die in peace. Poirot studied him a moment. And what of Lady Imogen? A flicker passed across Felix's face. Not mockery this time, something gentler. She's always been decent to me. Distant but decent. I think she tolerates me for Cassandra's sake. Or perhaps because I remind her of someone. Old families always have ghosts. And Clara? Felix exhaled a puff of smoke from the cigarette he'd produced somewhere along the way. Clara's too good for this place, for all of us really, but she's stuck, like ivy on a crumbling wall. She can't detach without tearing herself apart. You care for her? I think everyone does in their own way, Felix said quietly. She's untouched. That makes people protective or jealous. Poirot let the silence stretch, then leaned forward slightly. The mirror, monsieur. You know the one I mean. Felix looked up sharply, then laughed without humor. The mirror again, you're not letting that go. It was not an accident, I think. No, I dare say it wasn't, Felix said, voice suddenly flat. But I didn't break it, if that's your next question. Poirot said nothing. Felix drummed his fingers on the arm of the chair. I saw Julian that night, standing in front of it, just standing, not moving, like he was staring into it or through it. Then I heard the crash as I walked away. Make of that what you will. Did you speak to him? No. Julian doesn't speak. He delivers. Opinions, orders, verdicts. And the note left for Lady Imogen. Felix's eyes hardened. I didn't write it, but you saw it. I did. Poirot waited. Felix sighed. I saw her reading it the next morning. She didn't know I was there. She looked afraid. I didn't think anything could frighten her. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you, monsieur. You have been more candid than I expected. Felix stood, brushing invisible dust from his trousers. Don't mistake that for honesty, Monsieur Poirot. We all have our secrets. Even you, Imagine. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but mine, monsieur, are perfectly arranged and utterly harmless. Once Felix had gone, Poirot made a brief note in the small pocketbook he carried inside his jacket. The cracks were beginning to show. Already contradictions formed, timing, temperament, tension. This was no simple case of a family squabble. There was motive in the air. Unspoken, half-formed, but motive all the same. By noon he had spoken with Cassandra. The conversation had been elegant, superficial, and utterly controlled. She denied hearing anything on the night of the mirror's destruction, expressed mild concern over the note, and assured Poirot that the family's internal disagreements were merely growing pains. The only moment of interest came when he asked about Clara. She's terribly sensitive, Cassandra said, adjusting the emerald clasp on her wrist. She takes things to heart. A simple quarrel becomes a tragedy. I worry for her. Truly, Poirot had made no comment but marked the tone. Not protectiveness, ownership. At 1 o'clock, Treadwell appeared once more to inform Poirot that Julian was ready to see him. The meeting took place in the study, a masculine room of dark wood, mounted, swords and books arranged not for pleasure but display. Julian stood at the window, arms crossed, posture rigid. Poirot entered without speaking and waited. Julian turned after a moment. "I assume you've spoken to everyone by now," he said. "I have made introductions, yes." Julian moved to the desk. "Let me be clear, Poirot. I agreed to your presence because my mother insisted, but I don't believe in superstitions, whispers, or manufactured drama. If something needs to be handled, I will handle it." "With all respect, monsieur," Poirot said mildly, "you have been attempting to handle it for 3 years, and yet here we are." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting this family is in danger." "I suggest that the threat does not lie outside these walls." Julian said nothing. Poirot took a breath. "The mirror, monsieur. What was it that made you stare at it that night?" Julian's face betrayed nothing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Felix saw you." Julian's voice grew icy. "Felix sees what suits him. He's been a leech on this family since the day he arrived. If anyone were to send anonymous threats, it would be him. And yet he stays. Because Cassandra insists on playing the doting sister. And because Mother refuses to be decisive." Poirot tilted his head. "And the estate? You wish to sell?" "I do. Ashcroft is a sinking ship. The land is too expensive to maintain. The title means nothing anymore. I would rather see it reborn than rot in its own nobility." Poirot considered that. "And your mother? She's clinging to ghosts and dragging Clara with her. Would you say you resent that?" Julian's jaw tightened. "I would say I've grown tired of waiting." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, monsieur." The study door clicked shut behind him. Outside, the sun had finally pierced through the haze. Poirot stepped onto the gravel path just beyond the terrace, feeling the warmth on his face. A figure emerged from the hedges, Lady Imogen walking slowly with her cane, eyes distant. "Do you see it now?" she asked without turning. Poirot joined her. "I see it beginning to take shape. The mirror was not about the glass. It was a message. And someone, madame, is speaking in symbols." She paused near a rosebush and touched. "One of the wilted blooms I told you," she said quietly. "A storm is coming." Poirot nodded. "Let us hope we are not already too late." Later that afternoon, Poirot found himself seated once again in the morning room, this time with a small porcelain cup of Darjeeling between his fingers and the remains of a thin lemon biscuit on the saucer beside him. The warmth of the sun now streamed through the high windows, casting long streaks of gold over the stone floor. But inside Ashcroft Hall, the mood had not brightened with the weather. If anything, it had curdled. The interviews had laid a foundation, not of facts, but of fractures. Each member of the household wore a mask, but none quite succeeded in hiding the strain beneath. Cassandra's composure was brittle, Felix's wit was veiled contempt, Julian's discipline teetered on the edge of suppressed fury. Only Clara and Lady Imogen had shown something close to honesty, and both, Poirot noted, shared the same kind of silence, the silence of survival. He sipped the tea slowly and allowed himself a few minutes of stillness. It was not yet a murder, but it was becoming one in spirit. The threat was a living thing now, prowling the corridors, tightening its grip. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," Poirot called, setting down his cup. Treadwell stepped in, his expression unreadable. "A delivery for Lady Imogen, sir, but she has requested that you open it." Poirot raised a brow. "Indeed, and what sort of delivery is it?" Treadwell stepped aside, and a maid entered, carrying a rectangular parcel, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It was not large, perhaps the size of a slim book, but it had an odd weight to it in the way the maid held it, arms straight, as if reluctant to touch it. Poirot gestured for it to be placed on the table, then dismissed them both with a nod. Once alone, he leaned over the parcel. There was no postage stamp, no return address, only Lady Imogen's name written in block capitals with what appeared to be a charcoal pencil. The handwriting was firm but unrefined. He untied the string, carefully peeled back the paper, and exposed a wooden box. Its surface was unmarked, polished to a dull sheen. Poirot opened it. Inside lay a single item, a silver hairbrush, old and ornate, with delicate filigree along the handle. It was unmistakably a family heirloom, but it was broken clean down the thigh. Middle. The bristles had been crudely ripped from one side, leaving twisted metal beneath. Wrapped around the handle was a torn strip of linen, stained faintly at the edge. A faint floral scent, something antique, like dried lavender, still lingered. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Beneath the brush there was a folded note. He retrieved it. One by one, the past will be erased. She won't be the only one to lose her legacy. There was no signature. He closed the box gently, rose, and made his way to Lady Imogen's sitting room. She was seated by the window, a tapestry frame before her, although she wasn't stitching. She looked up as he entered and motioned for him to sit. "It's begun, hasn't it?" she said quietly. Poirot placed the box on the table between them. "Tell me, madame, this brush, it belonged to someone close." She didn't open the box. She didn't need to. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me on the day I came of age. I kept it in the dressing room. No one but the family would know where it was." Poirot nodded. "Then the message is deliberate. This is not the work of an outsider. The symbolism, breaking an heirloom, defiling something personal, it is intimate, designed to unsettle you." Lady Imogen exhaled slowly. "It's a warning, the mirror. Now this, they want me to feel hunted. Then the question becomes why. I've told you, because I stand in the way." Poirot tapped the lid of the box thoughtfully. "May I keep this for a short time? I should like to examine it more closely." "Of course." As he rose to leave, she added softly, "He's becoming impatient, you know." Poirot turned. "Julian." She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Back in his guest room, Poirot studied the brush once more under better light. He noted the fracture line, clean, purposeful, not accidental, and the linen strip, part of a handkerchief perhaps, or an old garment. There were no initials, but the fabric was of high quality. The stain, too faint to be blood, more likely lipstick or rouge. Odd. Everything about the object had been chosen for meaning. This was not a threat made in haste. It was a composition. The next morning brought a strange development. Poirot had just finished dressing when a loud voice echoed from the main hallway. "Felix, angry for once. I told you to knock, Treadwell." Poirot stepped out into the corridor in time to see Felix marching down the stairs, half-dressed and fuming. "Something is missing," he barked at no one in particular. "My writing case. It's gone. And with it, a full sheaf of drafts." Julian appeared from the breakfast room, adjusting his cufflinks. "What nonsense is this?" "I'm telling you, someone entered my room last night or this morning, I don't care which. My notes, my letters, they're missing." Julian rolled his eyes. "Perhaps they left out of boredom." Cassandra appeared, next already immaculate. "Felix, must you create a scene over your scribbles?" But Poirot stepped between them. "Monsieur Felix, this case, it contained only writings?" "Yes, poems mostly, fragments and some letters." "Letters of a personal nature?" Felix hesitated. "Some were addressed to Clara." Julian's head turned. "Clara?" Felix held up a hand. "Not like that. Reflections. Things I never gave her." Poirot's mind stirred. "Do you suspect someone in the house?" "Who else? We've no visitors. The servants wouldn't care. That leaves family." Poirot was about to respond when Clara appeared on the upper landing. Her expression was pale and unreadable. Felix saw her and stopped. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to involve you." She nodded once, then turned away. Poirot watched the way her hand gripped the banister. Something in her world had shifted. Later that day, Poirot asked for a moment with Mrs. Bletchley, the housekeeper, a tall, reedy woman with greying hair pulled into a severe knot. She regarded him with the weary suspicion common to staff who had served too long. "I wonder, madam," he asked gently, "have you noticed anything unusual among the servants? Whispers, absences, discomfort?" She hesitated. "They talk, of course, that's their nature, but lately, yes. There's tension, not just among the family." Poirot nodded. "And have any of the maids left recently?" "One. Nora. Parlour. Maid. Left abruptly 2 weeks ago, no explanation." "Did she serve a particular member of the family?" "Mostly Cassandra, sometimes Clara." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And was anything left behind?" Mrs. Bletchley considered. "She left her uniform and a scarf. I still have it in the linen room. I should like to see it." She fetched it promptly, an ivory silk scarf, soft and faintly scented. Poirot took it to the light. A torn corner, a missing thread, and yes, a faint matching stain. Rouge. The same as on the linen wrapped around the brush. So the warning had not come from outside. But it might have passed through borrowed hands. By late afternoon, Poirot stood alone once more in the hallway outside the east wing. He stared at the empty space where the mirror had once hung. The plaster around it had been patched roughly. No replacement had been made. Behind him, the house creaked faintly as if breathing. He placed a finger to his lips, thoughtful. Someone was moving the pieces into place, carefully, artfully. The heirloom, the note, the missing letters. All clues designed not to mislead Poirot but to shatter trust between the occupants of Ashcroft Hall. He turned back toward the stairs, footsteps soft on the thick carpet. The past was being dismantled, and someone, calmly, quietly, was preparing for a final act. That evening, a heavy stillness settled over Ashcroft Hall. Dinner was a muted affair. The family assembled out of habit rather than desire, each person occupied by thoughts they did not share. Poirot sat to Lady Imogen's right, observing the interplay across the table. Julian, as ever, ate with military precision, barely looking up. Cassandra played the gracious hostess with mechanical charm, refilling glasses, offering rolls, but never quite engaging. Felix drank more than he spoke. Clara sat quietly, barely touching her food, and seemed to shrink further into herself with each passing course. Poirot said little. He didn't need to. The air was thick with withheld things. When Treadwell cleared the last of the dishes and coffee was served in the drawing-room, Poirot rose slowly and turned to Lady Imogen. "If you would allow me, madame, I believe the time has come to gather everyone for a short conversation." She glanced at him sharply, but gave a slight nod. "Now?" "Yes. If it pleases you. I believe it may prevent an unfortunate misstep." Her face tightened. She understood. A few minutes later, they were all assembled once again in the drawing-room, the fire newly lit, the air fragrant with old wood smoke and tension. The room had grown colder, though no one mentioned it. Poirot stood before the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. "I thank you all for your patience," he began gently. "What I have to say is not an accusation, but a caution. You are, each aware, I think, that recent events, the shattered mirror, the anonymous notes, the stolen personal items, are part of a deliberate pattern, a slow, subtle erosion of trust." Felix, sprawled in his usual corner, gave a sardonic snort. Cassandra sat stiffly, lips pressed into a single line. Julian stared at Poirot, unblinking. Only Clara's expression shifted. She looked up, briefly hopeful. Poirot continued, "It is my belief that these incidents are not random, nor the product of external mischief. They are meant to provoke reaction, to drive suspicion inward." Cassandra spoke then, cool and sharp. "And do you have a theory as to who's playing puppeteer, monsieur?" Poirot raised a hand. "I do not accuse, not yet, but I ask each of you to consider who stands to gain from Lady Imogen's fear, who benefits from destabilizing this household just enough to make decisions in haste." Julian shifted. "If you're suggesting that this is about the estate, I suggest only that when trust crumbles, decisions are made that may later be regretted." Lady Imogen interjected then, her voice low but clear. "I am considering altering my will." All eyes turned to her. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. "I have not done it yet," she added, "but I intend to." Julian's voice was like a blade. "Mother—" "No," she said, cutting him off. "Let us not pretend. This house is mine, and so is the power to determine its future, and I will not be cornered into silence by anonymous threats or broken relics." Poirot stepped back, allowing the tension to bloom. Felix muttered something into his glass. Clara glanced at Cassandra, then back at the fire. After a moment, Poirot said softly, "Let me make an observation. Each of you feels watched, and that is no accident. The person behind these events wishes to unmoor this family, to isolate Lady Imogen. It is working." Cassandra stood. "I won't stay to be lectured like a schoolgirl." "No," Poirot said, But you will listen for your own sake, because if this continues, I assure you, someone will get hurt." Cassandra stared at him a moment, then swept from the room without another word. Felix followed with a shrug and a murmured, "Well, this was charming." Julian remained a moment longer. He looked at his mother, then at Poirot, and said nothing. Then he turned and left. Only Clara remained, her teacup trembling slightly in her lap. Poirot sat beside her. "Mademoiselle, you are afraid." She nodded. "Once. I will not ask you to name the person you suspect, not yet. But you know something more, something that you fear may cause harm." Clara bit her lip. "It's just a feeling, a wrongness. Every time I enter the East Wing now, I feel like I'm trespassing in someone else's plan." Poirot tilted his head. "The East Wing, the place of the mirror, yes?" She nodded again. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "we must return there." He left her then after a few words of comfort and made his way quietly back to the East Wing. The hall was dimly lit, only one sconce burning near the place where the mirror had hung. The repaired wall looked crude, hastily done. Poirot walked the length of the corridor, slow and attentive. At the far end, a small door stood ajar. He had not noticed it before. It was half hidden behind a faded tapestry, an old servant's passage. Perhaps. He pushed it gently. The hinges creaked. Inside was a narrow staircase winding upward. The air smelled of dust and old secrets. Poirot ascended. At the top he found a narrow corridor that wrapped behind the family bedrooms. It was unused, cloaked in shadows, but its dust bore recent tracks, light, careful footsteps. They led to a small wooden door, slightly ajar. Inside, he found a forgotten chamber, perhaps once a nursery or dressing room. A single chair faced a narrow window. On the chair sat a satchel. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside, papers, poems, letters, Felix's missing writing case. But it wasn't just his handwriting. There were others, trembling lines, angular notations. Notes in the margins, rewritten sentences, and beneath it all one sheet in Clara's hand. He did not read it yet. He replaced everything, closed the satchel, and stood very still. From the hallway behind him came the softest of sounds. A floorboard creaking. Poirot turned but saw nothing. He left the room as he had found it, closing the door quietly behind him. As he descended, he noted again the silence of the passage, the stillness of the house. Someone had been watching from the shadows. Back in his room, Poirot sat by the fire, deep in thought. The pieces were forming a pattern, a hidden passage, a stolen satchel. Clara's handwriting mixed with Felix's. Someone using another's voice to stir suspicion, but not for drama, for outcome. The question was not who felt wounded. The question was who had the discipline to wound precisely. The answer was not yet certain, but the game was no longer symbolic. It was beginning to turn real. The following morning broke with an unnatural hush. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. A slow fog had rolled in again overnight, blurring the edges of the garden and soaking the window panes with dew. Ashcroft Hall felt wrapped in cotton, muffled, still, expectant. Poirot rose earlier than usual, dressed meticulously, and left his room with quiet purpose. The unease from the previous night lingered like the scent of old smoke. He had not yet shared what he'd found in the hidden upper room. The satchel, the mingled handwriting, the creaking footstep behind him. But the implications pressed upon him like a gathering storm. Someone in this house was staging more than a mischief. They were orchestrating silence. In the breakfast room, only Clara sat waiting, her plate untouched, her cup of tea gone cold in her hands. She looked up as Poirot entered and offered a wan smile. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. "Nor I, mademoiselle," he replied, taking the seat beside her. "The air is thick with something unfinished." She looked down at her tea. Poirot hesitated, then spoke gently. "You left a letter in the satchel." Clara went still. Slowly she raised her eyes to meet his. "I didn't mean to. It wasn't meant for anyone to read." "Then for whom was it meant?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her lips trembled and she looked away. Poirot waited. Finally she whispered, "For me. I wrote it after Felix kissed me in the garden last spring." Nothing came of it. He made light of it the next morning, said it was wine and foolishness, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, but I never gave it to him. I left it in the library, folded inside a book. And someone found it. I suppose so. Poirot was quiet a moment. It was not only your letter that was placed in the satchel. There were other items, Felix's notes, his poetry, and annotations in at least 2 distinct hands. Someone is building a narrative, mademoiselle. A story within the shadows. Clara's brow furrowed. But why? That, Poirot said quietly, is the question. The door opened then, and Julian entered. Already dressed for the day, his tie knotted perfectly, his hair smoothed with military precision. He nodded at them both. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't care whether he was or not. Poirot stood. "Monsieur Willoughby, a moment of your time, if I may." Julian arched a brow. "Another interview?" "No," Poirot said. "A conversation. Walk with me." Julian hesitated, then nodded once. They left through the terrace doors and stepped into the damp garden, their footsteps muffled on the gravel path. The hedges loomed, heavy with mist. "I found something last night," Poirot said without preamble. "A satchel hidden in a room above the east wing. A passage leads there, a servant's stair." Julian gave a sidelong glance. "So someone's playing games in the walls now. You knew of the passage?" "It's an old house. I've explored every inch of it. I used to hide up there when father was in one of his rages." Poirot nodded. "And yet the satchel was not yours?" "No." "Then tell me, what were you doing in the east wing the night the mirror was broken?" Julian stopped walking. His face remained expressionless, but his fingers flexed once at his side. "I stood in front of it. That much is true." "Why?" Julian's voice was low. "Because my father hated that mirror. He said it was cursed, said it reflected weakness. Whenever he passed it, he would sneer at it, at himself, and at me." Poirot waited. "I was thinking of selling it. Before someone shattered it for me." "You didn't break it yourself?" "No." His voice was sharp now. "But I understand why someone would." Poirot turned toward him. "You speak often of change, monsieur, of rebirth, but you live in a house of symbols, and symbols resist being quietly discarded." Julian's eyes narrowed. "This house is a cage, Poirot. The sooner it's torn down, the better. For you, for all of us." He turned and walked back toward the hall without waiting for a response. Poirot remained where he was, the mist curling around his polished shoes. The cage. Yes, that was the word. Not just for Julian. For all of them. Each one locked in their role, their expectation, their silence. By late morning, Lady Imogen had requested Poirot's presence in her study. He found her seated by the hearth, a stack of old letters beside her, a pale silk scarf draped across her lap. "I found this in my drawer this morning," she said, holding up a folded note. Poirot accepted it and read, "One more relic. One more. Chain broken. If you will not choose, the house will choose for you." He looked up. "It is escalating." She nodded. "It's becoming more personal. The scarf, it was mine as a girl. My mother embroidered it. I haven't worn it in years." Poirot held it gently. "It is the same fabric I found wrapped around the broken hairbrush. Someone is using your past to undo your present." She looked down. "I fear I've allowed it, by hesitating, by not acting." "On the contrary, madame, you have preserved. That is not the same as silence." He paused, then asked, "Who do you believe is behind this?" Lady Imogen hesitated, then said, "I don't know, I thought I did. I suspected Julian, then Cassandra, but now, I wonder." "About whom?" She looked at him, eyes suddenly old. "Clara." Poirot said nothing. "She's been withdrawing. She walks the halls at night. She keeps to herself more and more. I found her once in the east wing, staring at the patched wall, tears in her eyes." "Did she explain?" "She said it reminded her of something that had been broken and could not be mended." Poirot sat back. "And what do you believe she meant?" "I don't know. I fear I never truly knew her." Poirot returned to his room in thoughtful silence. The pattern was beginning to settle. Clara's letter, Felix's scribbles, the broken heirlooms, the stolen scarf, all scattered symbols deliberately chosen. Someone was writing a story, not just committing acts. They were crafting a narrative with all the control of a playwright, feeding each person just enough suspicion to isolate them from the others. The intention wasn't madness, it was manipulation. And then, just before dinner, it happened. A scream, Poirot, was in the hallway when it came, sharp, high, and female. He ran toward the sound, past the east wing corridor, down the stairs, and into the drawing room where Clara stood, hands trembling, face white. On the carpet at her feet lay a broken photograph frame, glass shattered, the black and white image torn in two. It was a portrait of Lady Imogen and her late husband. On the back someone had scrawled in ink, "Even memory is not sacred." Poirot moved to Clara, who was whispering, "It wasn't me. I found it like this, I swear." "I believe you," Poirot said gently. He picked up the frame, examined the handwriting. Angular, deliberate, unhurried. The photo had not merely fallen, it had been placed, torn, displayed. He turned to Clara. "Was anyone else here?" She shook her head. "I came to find a book, that's all. Then I saw this." Behind him others arrived, Julian first, then Cassandra, then Felix. "What now?" Julian demanded. Poirot held up the photo, showing them the torn halves. Felix's eyes widened. That's going too far." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "This is no longer the dismantling of heirlooms. This is a campaign against identity itself." He looked at them all, eyes sharp. "And the story is nearly complete. But what, I ask myself, is its ending?" The drawing room stood frozen in the wake of the scream. The photograph lay on the floor like a wound, its torn halves now resting separately on the rug, the glass glinting faintly beneath the chandelier's muted light. Clara hovered near the fireplace, one trembling hand gripping the back of a chair. Cassandra, lips parted in surprise, slowly stepped forward, staring at the vandalized image. Felix, uncharacteristically silent, knelt to examine the shards. Julian remained by the doorway, arms crossed, jaw clenched. His eyes darted not to the broken frame, but to Clara. Poirot alone moved with purpose. He retrieved both halves of the torn photograph with a handkerchief, placing them gently on a nearby table. The ink on the back was still damp in spots. Angular letters, no smudging. Whoever had written the message had done so recently, minutes ago no more. He turned to the room. "No one entered before Clara?" No answer. The silence lingered too long. Cassandra spoke first, but softly, as if testing her own voice. "I came through the front corridor just now. I didn't see anyone." "I came from the kitchen," Felix added, his tone more subdued than usual. "I passed Treadwell on the stairs, but no one else." Julian said nothing. Poirot tilted his head toward him. "And you, monsieur?" Julian's face was unreadable. "I was in my study preparing tomorrow's letters. Did anyone pass your door?" "No. If they had, I would have heard." Poirot turned toward Clara. "Mademoiselle, you say you came in to fetch a book?" She nodded, her voice nearly inaudible. "From the cabinet near the window. I didn't see the frame until I turned around. Then I saw the glass." Poirot walked slowly to the window. The drapes were open just slightly. A faint breeze stirred the sheer inner curtains. He looked at the frame of the window, then to the sill. There, a smear. Dust disturbed. A fine thread of fabric snagged on a latch. Someone had come through here. Someone familiar enough with the house to know how to enter unseen. He turned back. The vandal did not enter through the door. They came through the window. Julian frowned. "But that opens onto the west terrace. Anyone could have seen, only if they were looking," Poirot said. "The fog has lifted somewhat, but it still clings to the hedges. A figure could cross the lawn unnoticed. And if they waited until the house grew still..." Cassandra exhaled sharply. "This is becoming grotesque." "No," Poirot said, voice calm but firm. "This is becoming final. This act, it was not only symbolic, it was surgical. The mirror shattered the house's reflection. The heirloom brush severed tradition. The note beneath your door, madame, erased the authority of memory. But this photo..." He looked at Lady Imogen, who had just arrived, summoned silently. By instinct or echo, this was the last piece of family dignity, the image of marriage, of permanence. Whoever tore this seeks not merely to disrupt, they wish to erase. Lady Imogen looked at the halves of the photograph. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Poirot approached her. "It must end tonight, madame, before the final blow is struck." She nodded, her voice brittle. "What do you need?" Poirot turned toward the others. "Everyone is to remain in the house tonight. All doors will be locked. I will speak with each of you again briefly before supper. No one is to go upstairs alone. And when the time comes, I will gather you for one final conversation." Felix gave a hollow laugh. "The drawing room once more? Shall we dress for the occasion?" Julian cut in sharply. "This isn't theatre." "But it is," Poirot said, his tone suddenly sharp. "It has been theatre from the beginning. A series of scenes, acts designed to manipulate, to accuse, to shame." He let the words hang, then added more softly, "But in all such plays there comes the moment when the curtain is drawn and the players face their audience." That night, supper passed in near silence. Treadwell moved between them like a man, delivering funeral arrangements rather than food. Poirot ate sparingly, observing each gesture, the way Julian tapped his fork against his glass as if marking time, the way Cassandra drank from her water goblet with both hands, as if needing the steadiness. Clara's eyes stayed fixed on her plate. Felix pushed food around but didn't taste it. At 9, Poirot requested that they all return to the drawing room. No one objected. The fire crackled in the hearth. Shadows played along the carved edges of the paneling. Poirot stood near the hearth once again, framed by firelight. He waited until everyone was seated, then slowly pulled from his pocket a folded paper, the torn halves of the photograph. "This," he said softly, "was not an act of impulse. It was premeditated. And the message on the back was not for Lady Imogen alone, it was for all of you. It says, 'Even memory is not sacred,' and that, I believe, is the key." Julian scoffed. "To what?" "To understanding the motive, not for theft or violence, but for erasure. Someone in this house does not wish merely to reshape the future, they wish to rewrite the past." He looked at Clara. "You spoke of walking the East Wing and feeling like you were trespassing, because someone has made you feel like a guest in your own home." Then to Felix, "You wrote things in private, poems, thoughts, reflections, and someone used them to expose you, not to hurt you personally, but to rupture trust." Then to Cassandra, "You have preserved elegance here, yes, but your silence toward Clara, your resistance to change, someone has used your distance as ammunition." And finally to Julian, "You have wished to tear this place down from the start. But what if someone wished to beat you to it? To make sure that when Ashcroft falls, it falls on your head and not theirs?" Julian stared at him. "What exactly are you implying?" "I imply only this, that everything has led to tonight, and that the final act is near." A sudden knock broke the tension. Treadwell entered, solemn. "Pardon me, sir, but I found something outside, in the hedgerow near the east garden." He held out a small bundle. Poirot took it. Wrapped in a bit of linen was a fountain pen, its nib still wet with dark ink. Wrapped around it a torn scrap of familiar paper, Felix's letterhead. Poirot unwrapped it fully. There, in neat, controlled handwriting, was a final message. "The past is poison. Let it die." Julian stood. "That's Felix's paper." Felix stepped back. "I didn't write that." Poirot raised the scrap toward the light. "No, monsieur, you didn't." He turned it toward Clara. "This is your hand." The room was dead still. Clara blinked. Her lips parted, then closed. When she spoke, it was in a voice unlike any she had used before, calmer, deeper, without tremble. "Yes," she said. "I wrote it." The room erupted. Julian barked something incomprehensible. Cassandra gasped. Felix stood in silence. Poirot raised a hand. "Silence, s'il vous plaît. Let her speak." Clara didn't look at any of them. She looked only at the fire. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. Not truly. But I wanted her to see, to feel what it's like to lose everything piece by piece. Like I did." Lady Imogen's voice broke. "Clara, What have you lost? My mother, she whispered. Your sister. You buried her here in this house. But you never spoke of her again. You erased her and me. I was just the quiet niece, the orphan, the one who should be grateful. Poirot stepped gently closer. So you became the ghost? Clara nodded. I never wanted Ashcroft. But I wanted her to look at me, to see me, not just the girl in the corner. Felix moved to her. You wrote those notes, the mirror. I didn't break the mirror, she said. That wasn't me, but I wrote the notes, planted the scarf, I took the satchel, and I wrote the last one tonight. I thought, maybe then she'd see. Lady Imogen's eyes shimmered. Clara, I see you now. Clara turned away. Too late. Poirot placed a hand on her arm. No, mademoiselle, not too late. But the play has ended, and the curtain must now fall. The fire crackled behind them, and Ashcroft Hall, old and weary, finally exhaled. The silence that followed Clara's confession was unlike the others that had filled Ashcroft Hall in the past days. This one was still, yes, but not brittle. It was something deeper, like the earth pausing before a storm breaks or a breath held too long finally exhaled. Lady Imogen remained seated, her spine straight, but her eyes no longer held the steely composure that had defined her from the beginning. Instead, they shimmered, not with shock but with recognition. It was as though for the first time in years she truly saw the girl sitting across from her, not as an orphaned remnant of a forgotten generation, but as someone with depth, intent, pain. Poirot stood with his hands gently folded, observing, not interfering, not pressing. The unraveling was complete. His work was nearly done. Cassandra rose from her chair with a breathy, "Excuse me," and quietly left the room, as though the weight of someone else's vulnerability had been too much to bear. Julian looked stunned, but there was something else behind his furrowed brow. Confusion mingled with a dawning clarity, a realization that the chaos he had blamed on external forces might have sprung from wounds within the house he'd been trying so hard to dismantle. Felix, ever the aloof observer, now looked at Clara with a new expression. Gone was the amused tilt of the mouth or the half-curious eyes. There was instead a gravity to him, a kind of respect. Lady Imogen stood slowly, the firelight playing against the silver in her hair. You wrote the notes, she said, her voice steadier than any of them expected. But you did not break the mirror. Clara shook her head. No, I wanted to frighten you. Or rather, not you, not exactly. I wanted to shake this place, to disturb its symmetry, but I couldn't bring myself to smash something so old, so beautiful. Poirot stepped forward at last. Then, mademoiselle, who did? Clara turned her eyes toward him, then slowly, across the room to Felix. He blinked once, then gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. I did, he said. I broke the mirror. Julian let out a harsh breath. You what? Felix shrugged, voice soft. I couldn't stand the way it looked at us. Me? All that history, all that judgment, so I shattered it. I'm sorry, Lady Imogen. She did not respond right away. Then she simply said, I suspected. But I told myself I was imagining it. Poirot gestured slightly. So, we understand. Now the beginning. The mirror was the overture, one born of impulse. But Clara, mademoiselle, you took it further. You crafted the rest, she nodded. I'd been planning it, not in a villainous way, at least not at first. It started with letters I found, my mother's journals, notes she wrote before she died. She loved this house, but it broke her too. The silence, the shame, the way the family buried pain beneath politeness. I began to understand how it all worked. The artifacts, the rituals, the roles we all play. So you decided to break the roles, Poirot said. One by one, yes. I thought if I could disrupt everything just enough, someone would speak, that Lady Imogen would have to see what she'd ignored, that maybe, somewhere along the way, someone would ask me how I felt, for once. Lady Imogen closed her eyes for a long moment, then crossed the room and sat beside Clara. She did not touch her, but her voice when it came was softer than any of them had heard. I should have asked years ago. When you were a child, when you lost your mother, I assumed kindness would be enough. I see now. It wasn't. Clara looked down at her hands. I wasn't brave enough to confront anyone directly, she murmured. So I left little ghosts for you all to chase. Poirot said gently, and yet in leaving ghosts you revealed truths. That is the irony of deception, mademoiselle. Often it is only through illusion that we discover what is real. Felix sat forward. So, what now? What happens to her? Julian stood. There has to be some consequence. She manipulated everyone in this house. No, said Lady Imogen, her voice suddenly firm. There does not have to be punishment, Julian. There has to be understanding. This was not a crime of greed or malice. It was a cry from someone we all overlooked. Julian didn't respond, but his mouth tightened, his eyes lowering. Not in anger, perhaps in something closer to shame. Poirot straightened his cuffs. Monsieur Felix, you broke the mirror. Mademoiselle Clara, you left the notes and staged the symbolic messages. Neither of you intended violence, but had this continued, it might not have ended in theatre. It might have escalated. Clara nodded. I know. Then allow me to suggest, Poirot said, that we end the performance now, with honesty. Fire crackled in the hearth again, louder than before. Clara leaned forward, voice quiet but certain. I don't want the house, she said. I don't want the inheritance or the legacy. I only want to be free of pretending, and to be remembered as something more than an afterthought. Lady Imogen looked into the flames for a long moment. Then she stood and turned to the others. I will revise my will, she said. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because it is time this house stopped being a monument to duty. It should reflect love and reality. Clara will be given the cottage on the south end of the estate, the one her mother loved. It will be hers completely. If she chooses to stay, she stays. If she chooses to leave, she leaves with my blessing. Clara blinked, stunned. Julian looked up. You're dismantling the estate? I'm dismantling the illusion, Julian. The house may stand, but it will no longer be ruled by silence. Poirot offered a small nod. A wise decision, madam. Cassandra re-entered then quietly, as though she had been listening from the hallway. She approached Lady Imogen and Clara without speaking and placed a small envelope on the mantel. I believe this belongs to you, she said to Clara. Clara picked it up. It was the letter she'd written and thought lost. Cassandra added almost to herself, I found it tucked into a book in the library days ago. I meant to return it. But I wasn't sure when. Clara smiled faintly. Thank you. Poirot stepped back toward the door. His presence, once central, was now receding. I believe, mes amis, he said with a small bow. My work here is done. The ghosts have spoken, and the future, at last, may begin. Lady Imogen stood with him at the threshold. You've not only solved our mystery, Monsieur Poirot. You've changed the way we see each other. He tilted his head. No, madame, I merely held up a mirror, one not yet broken. And with that, Hercule Poirot gathered his hat, his gloves, and his little suitcase, and stepped out into the mist that had begun finally to lift. Poirot's footsteps echoed softly along the gravel as he departed Ashcroft Hall, his figure briefly swallowed by the thinning mist curling low across the lawn. Behind him the house loomed silent, brooding as always, but somehow lighter, like a theatre after the final curtain has fallen, its echoes lingering in the rafters. The wind tugged gently at the hem of his coat. He paused at the edge of the drive, turning once to look back at the manor. The windows were glowing faintly with firelight. Somewhere within, truths had been unearthed and shadows named, yet something still lingered, an itch at the base of the mind, a faint dissonance like a missing bar in an otherwise perfect melody. Poirot did not dismiss it. The little grey cells never did. He stayed that night in a modest inn in the nearby village of Crescombe, where the rooms were small but clean, and the cook served a passable onion tart. He sat by the hearth in the common room long after the other guests had gone to bed, his hands folded neatly on the arms of the chair, eyes half closed in thought. It was not the outcome that troubled him. No, Clara's motives had been clear, if emotionally complex, and Felix's act of vandalism, while impulsive, had served only as the overture to her carefully orchestrated series of symbolic disruptions. Lady Imogen's decision had been just, perhaps even generous. All should have been resolved. But resolution and truth, Poirot knew, were not always the same. He rose early, dressed with his customary precision, and had barely finished his coffee when the village postmistress appeared, cheeks red from the wind. "Monsieur Poirot," she said breathlessly, "you're the gentleman from Ashcroft, aren't you?" "I am, madame," he replied, rising politely. "Is something the matter?" Well, something strange. We found it in the sorting room just this morning. The postmaster said it was misfiled. Must have slipped behind a shelf. But the name caught my eye." She handed him a small envelope, slightly smudged but otherwise intact. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Poirot turned it over. It was addressed not to Lady Imogen, nor Julian, nor any of the household. It was addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, CEO Ashcroft Hall. He frowned. "Merci," he said, and she left him to it. He opened the envelope with the flat of his thumbnail and drew out a single sheet of thick notepaper. There, in a careful but oddly formal hand, were a few short lines. "You were right. It was never about inheritance. It was about control. I didn't expect her to take it that far, but I see now I gave her the story, didn't I? No name, no signature, but Poirot knew the tone, the phrasing, the voice. Felix." He folded the letter slowly, placed it back in its envelope and slid it into his inside pocket. The feeling had not lied to him. The performance had ended, but not all the lines had been spoken. He returned to Ashcroft by foot, the distance, not great, the rhythm of his stride giving his thought structure. The grounds were quiet when he arrived, and he was let in without resistance by the housekeeper, Mrs. Bletchley, who seemed unsurprised to see him. "They've mostly kept to themselves today," she said as she led him through the front corridor. "Lady Imogen's in the conservatory. Clara's been in the gardens. Mr. Julian left early. London, I think. Miss Cassandra's in her rooms. Mr. Felix, well, he's in the library." Poirot thanked her and made his way directly to the library. He found Felix at the far window, sprawled in one of the deep leather chairs. A book open but unread on his lap. He looked up as Poirot entered and gave a tired smile. "I wondered when you'd come back." Poirot took a seat across from him, crossing one leg neatly. "The letter. You expected it would reach me?" "I wasn't sure. Thought perhaps the postal gods might delay it just enough. It arrived precisely when it needed to," Poirot said. "Now, tell me, what did you mean?" Felix exhaled. "She used me. Clara. Not intentionally, I think. Not at first. But when I showed her my writings, my poems, when I spoke to her about how stifling this house was, how everything was held together by dead names and dry traditions, I saw something shift in her." He looked out the window. "It wasn't malice. She was too gentle for that, but she was clever. She knew how to use suggestion. I said the mirror was ugly, cursed. Next thing, it's shattered. I told her I'd always wanted to vanish into the walls of this place, disappear behind the portraits like the house's own secret. A week later, my satchel vanishes. My poems reappear with new context, new voices." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you said nothing," Felix laughed softly. "Because it was beautiful in a strange, twisted way. She'd taken what I said, my frustrations, my metaphors, and made them real. And when it all began to fall apart, when the family started to fracture, I realized I wasn't just a bystander. I was her co-author." Poirot tilted his head. "So you wrote nothing yourself?" "No. Only the mirror. That was my crime. My anger. The rest was her stage." Poirot paused, then said quietly, "There is something you are still not telling me." Felix looked at him. "You knew about the servant's stare." Felix smiled without mirth. "Everyone does. Julian pretends it's some ancient secret, but we all found it as children. I used it all the time. Once I left notes for Cassandra through it, long before she married Julian." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You told Clara about it?" Felix's smile faltered. "Yes." Poirot's voice was soft. "And then she used it, to place the broken brush, the notes, the letters." Felix nodded. "She was good at slipping past people, at not being noticed." Poirot stood slowly. So you gave her the tools. She gave them meaning. Felix watched him go without rising. What does that make me, Poirot? Poirot paused at the door. A muse, he said, or perhaps a ghost of your own making. He left the library in silence. The conservatory was bathed in afternoon light, and Lady Imogen stood among the potted roses, clipping dead blossoms with delicate scissors. She turned as Poirot approached. You came back. I had to. Her eyes met his, and something in her expression shifted. It's not over, is it? It is, Poirot said gently. But it never ends completely. What Clara did, what she and Felix did, it was not criminal, but it was a reflection. Of what? Of the silences you thought were safe, the ghosts you buried under your own strength. Lady Imogen lowered the scissors. She asked me if I loved her. I said, I did. But I realized I'd never said it before, not in all these years. Poirot nodded. Then say it now and say it again until she believes it. He took her hand gently, then turned to go. This time, he did not look back at Ashcroft as he left. The air was clearer, the fog lifted, and the shadows, though long, no longer whispered quite so loudly. That evening Poirot dined alone once again at the modest inn in Crescombe, though the fire was warmer this time, the room quieter in a more settled way. He had finished his fish, and was sipping his coffee when the innkeeper, a cheerful man with a fondness for over-polished brass, appeared at the doorway with a sheepish grin. There's a young lady asking after you, sir. Wouldn't give her name, but says it's important. Poirot set down his cup without surprise. Please, show her in. The girl who stepped into the room was not quite who he expected. Not Clara, though for a moment her pale coat and soft features gave that illusion. But as she stepped forward, the flickering firelight revealed a different cast to the face. Narrower, more angular, with tightly drawn lips and a tension coiled in her shoulders. She was younger than 30, and her clothes, though discreet, carried a faint suggestion of London. Her gloves were too fine for a village girl. Poirot rose and bowed slightly. Bonsoir, mademoiselle. You seek Hercule Poirot? I do, she said. Her voice was low, calm. My name is Vera Harper. I used to work at Ashcroft Hall. He gestured for her to sit. Indeed. And what was your role, if I may ask? Parlour maid. 2 years ago. I left suddenly. Perhaps they told you. They mentioned Honora. That was the name I gave the household, she said. It wasn't mine. Poirot watched her closely. And why come now, mademoiselle? Vera hesitated, glancing toward the fire, as though trying to decide where to begin. I read about your visit in the village post, she said finally. That something had happened at Ashcroft, and I knew it would only be a matter of time before it surfaced. Poirot remained silent, allowing her space. I left because of Julian Willoughby, she said, voice soft but even. He never laid a hand on me, not directly, but he made the house unsafe, especially at night. He drank more than anyone knew, had a temper. One night, he followed me into the corridor near the east wing. I locked myself in a linen closet until morning. Poirot's face did not change, but his posture shifted slightly. You told no one? I tried to tell Mrs. Bletchley, but she said I must have misunderstood, that the family was under stress, and it wouldn't be wise to cause trouble. So I left the next day. Poirot leaned forward. And since then, I kept an eye on things. I heard whispers when the Colonel died, heard Julian took over. I came back to Crescombe last week to see a friend, and that's when I heard about Lady Imogen bringing in a detective, about the heirlooms, the threats. And you thought it might be Julian, she nodded. He always spoke of the house as though it were a burden, as though everyone in it were in his way. I just thought, if something worse happened and I said nothing, I'd carry it. Poirot stood slowly. Mademoiselle, your words may change very little of what has passed, but they may prevent harm to come. He asked her a few more quiet questions, took down her address, and thanked her sincerely. When she left, he remained by the window for a long while, watching her retreat into the darkness. The following morning, Poirot returned once more to Ashcroft Hall. He did not announce his arrival this time. He was expected. He found Lady Imogen alone in the morning room, dressed in dove grey, her fingers wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. "You've heard something," she said simply. He nodded. "A former employee came to me, one who left suddenly. She spoke of your son." Lady Imogen's eyes closed. "I suspected," she whispered, "but suspicion without proof is a coward's burden." "She did not come to accuse, madame, only to warn. She believes the atmosphere of this house enabled more than silence. It enabled fear." Imogen looked out toward the window. "Julian is in London. He wrote this morning. Said he intends to put in a formal offer to sell the estate to a developer. Apartments, he said, modern and practical." Poirot's mouth tightened. "Even now?" She nodded. "Even now." "Then forgive my bluntness, madame, but I must ask, why do you allow it?" She set down her cup with a clink. "Because it is easier to fight ghosts than your own children." Poirot studied her. "And yet you have begun. With Clara. With your will." Lady Imogen gave a short breath, half sigh, half sorrow. "Yes, but I wonder if it is too late to undo the rest." Poirot shook his head. "It is never too late to be precise. A mistake may last years. But truth only takes a moment." He left her in thought and made his way upstairs. He found Felix, packing a worn suitcase in his room, an old tweed coat folded neatly on top. "You are leaving, monsieur?" Poirot asked. Felix nodded without turning. "I think it's time. Clara is better off with space. Cassandra has said little, which I think is her way of forgiving me. And Julian, well, I suspect he won't miss me." Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "And you? Do you regret it?" Felix paused, then looked up. "Yes and no. I regret the silence more than the noise." Poirot nodded. An eloquent summary. Downstairs in the far garden, Poirot found Clara among the autumn roses. She looked thinner but clearer somehow, as though her sorrow had found form and been made bearable. "I thought you'd gone," she said, not unkindly. "I had, but there was one final truth to attend to." She turned toward him slowly. "Clara," he said softly, "you believed the only way to be seen was to disrupt. But you were seen even in your quiet. By Lady Imogen, yes, but also by someone else." He held out a letter. Clara took it with a puzzled look and unfolded it. It was written in Felix's hand. "I do not forgive you yet, but I understand you. And when one understands, forgiveness becomes possible. You used my words, Clara, but I used you too. In making you feel seen, I felt less invisible myself. I am leaving Ashcroft, but I leave behind the only thing that mattered. Someone who loved it honestly." Her eyes filled slowly with tears. "He wrote this?" Poirot nodded. "Last night, before he packed." She closed the letter and held it to her chest. "Will I ever be forgiven, do you think?" "That is not for me to say, mademoiselle, but you have given something to this place that no inheritance could, a mirror that shows it as it truly is." She smiled faintly. Unbroken. Poirot tipped his hat. He left Ashcroft Hall for the last time as the bells of Crescombe Chapel began to chime the midday hour. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting long rays across the frost-tipped grass. As he walked the winding road away from the estate, he did not look back this time, not out of haste, but out of trust. The ghosts had been named, the secrets spoken, and for once the past did not chase after him. It stayed exactly where it belonged. Behind. The train rolled gently through the Dorset countryside, the rhythm steady, almost hypnotic. Hercule Poirot sat in a first-class carriage, his hands folded neatly over his lap, his valise tucked precisely under his seat. He had removed his gloves, but not yet his overcoat. Across from him, the view of distant hills passed quietly, their outlines softened by the pale autumn light. He had thought the case finished. He had thought that Clara's confession, Felix's complicity, and Lady Imogen's quiet grace in response had resolved what needed resolving. But resolution, Poirot knew, was not always justice. It was not always truth. He removed from his breast pocket a final letter, delivered that morning at the inn, just before his departure. No return address, but he had recognized the handwriting instantly. Cassandra's. The note was brief. Poirot, I thought you might want to know. Julian withdrew the offer. He never reached London. Something changed him. I suspect it was the silence. That followed your visit. The silence in which no one accused him, yet everyone knew. He's gone to stay with a cousin in the north. For reflection, he said. We shall see. I remain. Poirot folded the letter with great care and returned it to his pocket. Cassandra had always been a cipher, neither cruel nor kind, only attuned to survival. But in her silence now there was something else, perhaps a fragment of clarity. As the countryside blurred past the windows, Poirot closed his eyes and considered the case, not just as a series of acts, but as a study in silence. Ashcroft Hall had not been undone by violence or greed. It had been undone by what had not been said, grief unspoken, injustices excused and roles accepted without protest. Clara had tried to shatter that silence with theatrical means. But in doing so, she had accomplished something far more delicate. She had forced every member of that household to hear themselves for the first time. Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. He thought again of Lady Imogen standing among the roses, the shears idle in her hands, of Clara holding Felix's letter to her heart, of Felix himself, restless, uncertain, but finally moved, of Julian retreating not in arrogance, but perhaps in quiet shame. The threads had not all been mended, but they had been loosened, untangled, set free, and that, Poirot thought, was enough. The train pulled into the next station with a hiss of steam and clatter of brakes. Poirot gathered his coat and stood, placing his hat carefully atop his head. He stepped down onto the platform just as the wind picked up, scattering the leaves in small, elegant spirals around his polished shoes. Behind him, the train groaned and departed, the sound fading into distance. Before him, the road waited, quiet, civilized and orderly, just as he liked it. And so Hercule Poirot walked on, his little grey cells content once more.